Thank y'all. Welcome back to our YouTube channel. In this video, I'm going to show y'all how to make these. These are pretty popular. Little pancake scabbards are real easy to make. The leather that I use on these is a 9-10 ounce leather, or whatever I use for my belt bodies is usually an 8 to 9, 9 to 10, somewhere around in there. And that's what I use for the front and the back. By the time you're done, it gives it a nice hefty weight. It's going to be 2 pieces. If you follow the link in the description, there's some patterns available for tooling. It'll come with tooling patterns and the cut patterns for both the front and the back. They're basically mirror images of each other. But this is a really simple knife scabbard to make. It's a great project to start out with, and I'll have probably half a dozen different tooling patterns for you to put on there, and the stitch lines as far as where I stitch. Now this knife scabbard will fit just your standard double blade case trapper, just a trapper style knife. That's what this pattern is made for. I have some other patterns on the website for this type of knife scabbard, but it's for a Leatherman, and I think there's some more other ones on there too, but mainly it's for the bigger size Leatherman. But you can make these for any knife. You just basically got to adjust them for the width and thickness of the knife a little bit. But this pattern will fit the case trappers, so, and they're all the same. It doesn't necessarily have to be a case, but the trapper knife is the most popular one. And this particular pattern, the belt goes through straight, but the knife is at a bit of a 45 to the belt, which is a really neat. A lot of guys like those because they're kind of bent over. They're not just straight up and down, which can kind of catch you in the hip a little bit. And these kind of lay a little bit of an angle. So in this video, like I said, I'll walk you through all the steps from the time I cut them out to assembling them, tooling them, assembling them, dyeing, doing all the dye work, that sort of stuff. But if you're interested in making some of these, the patterns are very easy if you want to do your own, but if you do want the pattern that I use, it is available on our website at dgsaddlery.com, along with a lot of other patterns that we're trying to add more and more to that. So okay, so here we've taken the pattern and put it on. I have it at a poster board, so it's a little beefier, and I'm just tracing that off. I go ahead and put my slots in there too, because those will help to line up your tooling. And I'm going to be making 3 of these in this video, so that's why I'm cutting out 3 of the fronts. The backs are exactly the same. I just leave a little feather around the sides and the bottom. I leave the top cut true so that you can line them up. And I'm just using a razor blade. That handle you can buy at Hobby Lobby, and it'll hold the injector blades that we use in our hand skivers and stuff. It's a little bigger than the normal X-Acto knife, but I recommend those, and Hobby Lobby usually has them. Makes it easy to cut those curves and cut them clean instead of using a trim knife. Now here I'm just going to take my calipers, and I'm going ahead and just kind of using that for my spacing on the top and the bottom. And then trying to check my spacing there. My patterns, if you buy the pattern pack off our website, it should have that spaced out for you, but and you can just trace it off, but I use a ruler there just to kind of get my lines straight. You need enough space between the side of the tooling and those slots for your stitches to come through, because we want to stitch down both sides of the tooling as well. And here we're just going to draw. And the pattern pack that's available on the website, it does have 8. I think in this video I did say 6, but I went ahead and did 8 of them. There's 8 different tooling patterns. They're real simple. You can do initials and brands. You can draw kind of whatever you want to as far as the tooling. And basket stamp works well too, and even the rough out ones if you don't want to tool them or just do a border or something like that. Okay, so we've mixed this down now with some water. I just used my spray bottle on these. They're thin and light, so there's no reason to really do a deep case on these. But this, if you've watched my tooling practice video as far as the swivel knife video, these little knife scabbards are a great way to practice your tooling and get a full scope on a smaller project, as far as from drawing to carving to tooling to decorative cuts. it's just a great way to really, you can do this project on a Saturday, and do one of these and really get a feel for the whole process. But when you're doing this, just remember your tooling or your carving techniques, kind of like we talked about in that other video. I mean, practicing your curves and your flow, and you'd be surprised how much different flow of direction and stuff you can get on a smaller project like this. You don't always have to necessarily tool a photo album to really get floral layout and design down. Okay, so in here, I'm not going to go through the tooling process. We've done a couple videos on some tooling, but I'll get into that more later. But here we're going to go ahead and jump ahead. We've already tooled these. All three of these that I'm making, by the way, they're all the same tooling pattern. So we'll skip around a little bit on some of these. But this one here, we're just doing the dyeing. Again, if you've seen the dye video, you kind of know my technique as far as, I like to dye the background first and get all that done, and then we'll come back through. I'm going to do these two-tone brown, so we're dyeing the background first, and then we'll dye the entire outside. So the only thing that'll be natural finish will be the actual artwork or the tooling on this, and you can use any color you want on these. And the nice thing with these is that there are a lot of, you can't really screw them up. You can do wild colors, wild ones, more plain Jane. You can do basket stamp. You can do really anything you want to do on these, because they're small enough and people just like knife scabbards. You're not necessarily trying to match a certain belt or a certain pair of boots or anything like that, so you can kind of get wild and crazy and do what you want. Okay, so as you can see here, I've went ahead and picked up the bigger brush, and I'm just using the brush to get really close to my border there. I want to make a lot of coverage, but I want to be real careful not to get it on the tooling, so I'm going to use a little bigger brush, but I'm going to be still pretty careful coming around there, and just make some good coverage, just one good wide swath around the tooling, because then the rest of that I can catch that with a dauber. So I always recommend kind of using the biggest brush that you can get away with, because it holds more paint, creates less work, or more dye, so you're not having to really just do a lot of meticulous work when it comes to covering that. So we're going to get as close as we can with this stepped up brush, and then we're going to come in with a dauber and just cover the rest of what's exposed, and we won't have any problem having to worry about getting close to the tooling. Now I do go ahead and I do 2 coats on anything smooth. Usually, that if you're using brown, it's a good idea to go ahead and do 2 coats at least, just because that brown kind of looks a little uneven if you don't. The background, not necessary. You can just do 1 in there. But as far as anything smooth on what you're two-toning, that probably needs to be covered twice. If you're doing black or maybe red or some wild color, you may or may not have to, but I like to go ahead and do 2 coats. And so like here I'm building 3, so I just kind of set it up to where I'm, do the background, then put that aside, do the next one, do the background, put that aside, do the next one, do the background, then come back and then do the outside, and I'm kind of stepping around, and that way I can take my time. Okay, and on this one, now we've got them dyed, and so they're all two-toned. I've let that dry for, I don't know, probably 30 minutes or so. Like I said, it doesn't take very long. And then I put a little bit of oil on it, and I use olive oil. And now I'm just coming through with my tan coat, and I'm going to put me a good little coat of tan coat on these because I'm going to antique them. So I want that barrier in between the leather and my antique. So we're going to put tan coat on them, and then we're going to let these dry for probably a half hour or so. So now we've let that dry, and I'm going to go ahead and grab me just a little bit of antique. I use the dark brown or medium brown. You can use whichever one you want. The Sheridan finish is normally a mahogany or something, but whatever your antique finish is. And I use a 5-Bings paste, and I just put a little bit out there on my board, and then go ahead and work it in. And like I said, if you're doing 3 or 10 or whatever, you can kind of just go down the line and do each step to each one, and by the time I get to the end and then come back, and I can clean off the first one and then work my way back down through the process. And this is kind of an easy way to set up doing more than one item and kind of making a little bit faster progress than if you were to build one at a time. And I'm just grabbing a clean dauber, clean sheepskin rag there, and just buffing them off. And I work hard to try to get as much antique off of those as possible. I really only want the antique down in the background and in the cuts and stuff, so I want them to look really clean. And so if you've got to get another, clean sheepskin, just go ahead and do that if you've got too much residual antique in that. I like to buff them and make sure they're clean looking. So as you can see there's not a lot of residual antique hanging out. They're pretty clean, and it just enhances the tooling. That's what it's intended to do, not change the overall color. So now we're going to go ahead and start getting ready to do the assembly. Now I go ahead and sand, edge, and slick the very top edge of each piece, the front and the back. And I do this because you could do it after they're already sewn. You could just sand and edge and slick all the way around them. But to me, the top, that's where your knife's going to slide in and out. So if I want them edged on the inside and front or outside, I want the knife to be able to slide in there fairly easy. So I go ahead and edge and slick the top edge before I put them together. And I do that to the front and to the back piece. Just the top edge. I don't worry about the sides. So here we should take our edger. I'm using a number 2 Barry King edger there. And on a 9 to 10 ounce leather, or an 8 to 10, or whatever you're using, that's plenty. You could edge the inside there where I'm edging. You can edge that a little heavier if you wanted to, just so that you've got a little bit more of an opening, but I found that the number 2 is fine on all of these. And so here's the back pieces, and as you can see, they're just a little bit wider, or they have a little bit more of an edge around the sides and the bottom, and that's so that I've got a little feather I can trim off. But I don't want to cut those out true to the fronts, because when you glue them down after you tool them, sometimes they'll stretch some. So you want to be sure that the back's a little bit bigger than the fronts. But I cut the tops true, and that way when I'm gluing them together, you'll see in a minute that I can line up the tops, and I know that they're where they're supposed to be. But we're going to go ahead and edge all these and slick them as well. And I'm going to slick all 6 pieces at one time. So as you can see, I'm kind of stepping my process through each individual piece, and that way, instead of edging, sanding, edging, and slicking, then grabbing the next piece, sanding, edging, slicking, just sand them all, edge them all, slick them all, do them all in that steps, and it moves a little bit faster. Now when it comes to edging, I do use glycerin soap. A lot of people ask me about that. That's just a piece of glycerin saddle soap. You can buy the bars, 5-Bings saddle soap bars, and I just use that. I use more water and more elbow grease than soap. I'm just putting a little bit and using that and rubbing just a little bit of that soap on there, and it just helps to get the fibers laying down a little easier, and just kind of it's just kind of a helpful thing to do. And so that's on all my edges. I use that, and so as you can see, I'm not going crazy. I'm just putting a little bit on there, and it just helps to lay them fibers down so that it slicks up nice. And my rub cloth that I'm using, that's just a piece of canvas. I buy canvas, 2 or 3 yards worth at Hobby Lobby once every couple of years. I don't go through very much of it, but you can use denim. The only thing with denim that I've found occasionally is that unless they're just a really, really old wore out pair of jeans, sometimes that blue will come off on the edge, the blue dye in the denim. So I just prefer to use the canvas, and you know, once I get a new piece of canvas, if I wear that, when that rag gets wore out and I need a new one, is I'll take that and cut me a square of it, and I just fold it usually 4 times, to where I've got a few different surfaces to work on. But then I'll rub that white saddle soap, you know, just the canned white saddle soap. I'll just work a little bit of that into that canvas, and then for the first time, and then after that it usually catches enough soap from just the process of using it day in and day out that it kind of becomes a little magic slicking rag. So that's how I like, you know, like them. When they get old like that, it's hard to give up on one because they're just now getting to where they work really, really well. But if you work just a little bit of saddle soap, you could even take that glycerin bar and just rub it on that canvas just to get a little bit of that natural glycerin into the fibers of that canvas, and it really helps slick your edges a lot more consistently. And in that little can, I've just got water. I use a little can with water and a dauber. And you can, some of the guys will put a few drops of ivory dish soap in there, and that sure does help. I always just forget, but you can put just a little bit of ivory dish soap in your little can of water there, stir it up, and it helps too. You can probably use that and just not use the glycerin if you'd like. That tends to work out pretty good. As just anything to kind of help get it started. I know a lot of guys just use water, but for me it seems to just speed up my slicking just a little bit, and seems to give it a better gloss and a little bit more shine once it's dried. Okay, so all our tops are slicked, and as you can see there, that top edge should match up, and then I've got excess around the outside and the bottom, and that's for trimming later. So the tops match up, we're good to go. Now after these have dried some, you know, let your edge dry. Don't try to edge dye them while they're wet, because that dye will take a little bit longer to absorb and more apt to run or bleed. So now I'm going to take all of these and just, now that they've dried a little bit, and I'm just going to go ahead and edge coat my tops, and that way that's done. I don't have to worry about that whenever I'm finishing the assembly. So we've let that edge dye dry a little bit, and so now I'm just going to go through and glue. Now when you're gluing these, remember they're pancake style, so all you're trying to do is hold these pieces together while you sew them. You do not need to get glue all the way up to where your tooling is and this kind of thing, because you're going to sew both sides of where you're going to cut your slots, so there doesn't necessarily need to be glued. If you get too far in, it gets really hard to open that back up if you're trying to get your knife in there. So I just kind of go around the edge, and as you can see, I'm probably going a little bit more than I need to, but I just put a little around the outside edge. That's what makes these so easy to build, is because you don't have a lot of line up and worry about your spacing and whatnot. You can just put enough glue just to hold it together while you're stitching it. If you were brave and wanted to just hold them and stitch them, you probably wouldn't even have to glue them, but I like my edges, when I'm done, I want them glued down even outside of the stitch line, so that they don't ever open back up as that leather dries. I want those two pieces to be glued well. So we're going to glue just around the edge, and I just do one coat on these. There's no reason to come back and do 2 coats. All it's doing is holding them together while you're sewing them. So now that glue's gotten tacky, and as you can see, I'm just lining up my front to my back. And just remember, when you're using that pattern pack, the back is the reverse of the front. So don't just cut out a bunch of the same pieces and think you're going to flip them. You can do that, but you're going to have rough out on the back, and I want slick on both front and back. So I'm just lining up the front, and then just kind of tapping it down and making sure they're glued good. And now I'm going to take my groover and then go ahead and just groove me a line. Now the outside is easy because you can just follow your edge just like anything else. Just follow your edge around. And by this point I can barely see the line that I drew with my pencil when I cut these parts out of where my slot is. But it's not that crucial. It's just, you know, if you follow the pattern, your slots, you're going to have room for your slot. If you're cutting it with a big bag punch or cutting it by hand, you'll have room for that. But just taking the groover and doing my outside stitch line. And you don't necessarily have to groove these. I like to groove everything when I stitch. It just makes it look a little more professional. So now here I'm just kind of being sure I know where my slot is, because basically we're going to split the difference between the slot and the edge of the tooling with a line, and it's going to come straight down from where our groove stopped and then come there. So as you can see, I'm just connecting the lines. And depending on what groover you're using, my groover, I can open it up all the way, and it's a Horseshoe brand groover, Jeremiah Watt tool, and I really like it. It works well. But there's other groovers. If you've got a Versa groover or something like that, then you can just take the guide out of the Versa groover and then just run it freehand. I really like that groover, and I had one, but I don't have it anymore. But this one, I just open it up all the way and then just freehand follow that line. If you're not real good at that and you're worried about it, about getting that line off or something like that, then I would suggest maybe not grooving that line. Just groove your outside line and then sew that one without a groove. It won't be that noticeable, but biggest thing is be sure not to stitch across the opening. so here now, this was a trick to figure out what direction to go and where to start. But if you'll kind of look at that and then maybe start it, this is the best way I've found to sew these, because it's one continuous stitch. So instead of starting at the top and going all the way around the outside and then coming back down, you'd have to stop again. So I start at the bottom of one of the inside lines, and I always like my work to be outside of my machine. So it took me a minute to kind of remember exactly where to start so that happened. So as you can see, the bulk of my work is outside of my machine. And if I'd have started on the other side at the bottom, the bulk of my work would have been inside my machine, which it'll still sew, but for me it's just a weird way to, it feels funny to me, and it always feels like the needle's going to slide out of my machine, out of my work. So so if you'll start there on that right hand side at the bottom and then come up and loop around, you can make one continuous stitch without having to stop. And that'll save you a lot of time and a lot of extra, you know, having to cut stitches and burn and tie them down and all that kind of stuff. And I'm stitching on an old Ferdco machine. They're not even in business anymore, but it's basically like a Juki. And you could probably sew these on a smaller machine, but that's the machine I use. And I backstitch all my stitches, so unless it's a really high stress point, I don't usually worry about tying them off. I just cut them because I've backstitched them. And I'm just going to take my razor blade here and just trim that extra little feather off, even with my front. And you can use just a regular trim knife if you want. I'm usually just, my knife's usually wore out by the middle of the day, and so for trimming stuff like this, I usually just use a razor blade. It's just a little easier for me than anything else. But try to trim that real close, and the better you trim this kind of stuff, guys, the less sanding you'll have to do. So try to get real proficient whenever you are trimming things. Just try to do it cleanly and efficiently, and that way you don't have a whole lot of sanding time left when you're done. So now that we've got them trimmed, I'm going to go ahead now and just sand. Remember, we've already done our top edge, so you don't have to worry about that. But I use a round, it's just a dowel rod, and then I've got a piece of sandpaper that I just hold on there and wrap it around there. That allows me to get into those curves, just sand those down. If you've got a power sander or a finisher or something like that, this step goes a lot easier and much faster. But this right here works, and I just get my inside curves. And then once the inside curves are nice and smooth and everything, then I'll grab my flat sander, which is just a wood block, and I'll go ahead and sand the outside edges of that. So there, and then I can just kind of clean those edges up. And I just like everything to be smooth and make sure it's even. It's a good opportunity too to make sure that your stitching looks good on the back and that it's straight and you didn't skip any stitches or anything like that. Just kind of be looking at your work and making sure that everything's where you want it. So I found these little sanding blocks at Lowe's. I'm sure Home Depot has them too, but they're just a foam finish sanding block. But they're really nice for what we do, just because they are soft, and so no matter what your edge looks like, they kind of conform, and they come in a lot of different grits, and that one's a lot more of a fine grit than what I was using previously to this one, and so it just helps to smooth that nap down along your edges. And if you want nicer edges, you're going to have to sand to a higher grit so that you get the grain a lot finer, and that'll also speed up your slicking process, and so that it's not so hard to get, because if it's too rough, it's going to be really hard to get it nice and smooth. So here we're going to be using a number 4 edge, just because we are a little thicker and heavier here. Edge all the way around it. Again, like I said, we don't have to worry about our top because we've already sanded, edged, slicked, and dyed that. In this area here, we're just now going to do all the way around the outside of these. And so I'll do the front and the back, and then we'll slick those as well. So now those edges have all been slicked, and then we let them dry again. Gonna let them dry for about 10-15 minutes, whatever it takes, and then come back through and just dye the edge down the side and the bottoms. And when I'm dyeing edges, I'll dye from the front where I can see the front of the project, and I make sure I get all that's edged dyed, and then I'll flip it over and I'll go along the back. This kind of ensures, a lot of guys will cram that dauber right up against it and try to make one pass all the way around it. What happens is it either bleeds to the front or bleeds to the back, and so I kind of do it in 2 parts. I dye the front edge of the edge, and then I flip it over and do the back edge of the edge, and that just makes sure that my dye doesn't run out and get somewhere that I don't want it, or allow it to bleed up into the stitches or whatever. And so just take your time. And I'm dyeing, I don't use edge dressing, I just use dye. So that's just dark brown or medium brown 5 beings oil dye, and that's all I use for my edges, and that really makes it clean. And when I'm done, I can put tan coat on the edges and it makes it shine, and there's no problems with it. Okay, so we've dyed the edges and let them dry. I like to let them dry for a good half hour. Then I'm going to come back and put the final step of tan coat on there. And in the antique video, a lot of people asked about that and missed that portion, but on my antiquing on everything, there's always one last wipe down of tan coat, and that helps to rid the project of any excess antique. And your tooling or anything that you want natural, it'll kind of, that antique process will kind of dull that out a bit. This step here, this final step of tan coat, helps to clean that tooling off and to get any excess antique off, and makes the project shine again. So it'll actually bring that bright, vibrant color back into your tooling where the dullness had kind of taken. So now we'll just let that antique or that tan coat dry, give it probably a good 20-30 minutes. Now the last step on these is to come in and punch our bag punches, or our slots for our belt. Now I have a big 2-inch bag punch. If you do not have one, but you have a 1-inch or even a 3/4, the 1-inch is going to be wider though, and then you're going to need the width, not just the length. But you can use a 1-inch and just double tap it. But however you're going to cut those slots, but this would be the time when you come back in and cut them. And if you want to take your pattern and set it back over the top of that and redraw those, because a lot of times through the whole process your original pencil marks of where your slots go maybe wore off, but I don't really do that. All I do is try to center that bag punch in between my stitches, so from top to bottom, left to right, to where it's kind of centered in that area that we stitched off, and that'll kind of ensure that you've got enough meat on both sides. The thing you don't want to do is get that bag punch too close to the top edge or too close to the outside edge to where you just have a little bit of stitched meat of leather right there. Like, you want it to be strong enough to where it won't break and wear, because that's going to be a high wear spot, especially on the top edge of those. Now here's all three of the ones that we've built, and I'll take a stick, just a rub stick, and run it down inside there and just kind of twist it and stretch out any excess glue that may have adhered that in past the stitches. And that's why, again, I said don't go too wide in there with that swath of glue whenever you're gluing them together. And there's a double blade trapper, and it slides right in. And you may or may not want to have more or less knife sticking out the top of that. I think that's about right on an angled one. It's not going to fall out. Knife fits in there well, and they fit even tighter and better once the belts run through there and they kind of get broke in. So that's a nice thing with those, because they don't loosen up like a standard knife scabbard does. But that's them. Alright, so that's how I make these knife scabbards. I hope the video was helpful. I hope it kind of didn't go too fast and show you kind of what we're doing. Like I said, they're real simple. You don't have to get too crazy with them, and it's just a great project to start out with, or even for seasoned guys to make these, because these are really popular knife scabbards. I used to make a lot of them and sell them in the shop, and they're just really handy. They're real popular, and you can change them up really easy depending on knife size and style. But like I said, I hope the video was helpful for you. And if you're interested in getting the pattern that I drew up, which you can make your own very easily, but if you would like this pattern for this one in particular, it is available at dgsaddlery.com. And along with that, when you purchase that pattern, it'll come with a cut pattern for the front and the back, and as well as 6 other tooling patterns for it. So you'll have some artwork you can play with, modify, use. And like I said, even the rough out ones sell really well. The rough out ones are fun to make as well. And like, if you want, you could buck stitch these. You wouldn't necessarily have to sew them if you don't have a sewing machine. And if you did want to sew them and you want to sew them by hand, they don't take that long to sew by hand because of their size. And like I said, they're just a lot easier to deal with. So I highly recommend these. I thank y'all for watching. I hope you found it useful. Be sure to subscribe to our channel if you can. That way you'll get the latest updates when we turn out a new video. And give us a like on there, a thumbs up if y'all can, if you like the video. And if you got any questions, put them in the comments, send me an email, whatever, and I'll see if I can help you out with them, and we'll try to get some more videos out as soon as we can. Thank y'all.